Short Read 1. Remember to annotate as you read.
The Blind Men and the Elephant. Long ago, in a village in India, there lived 5 blind men. The men had been blind since birth, and they had learned to rely on their other senses to understand the world. The 5 men were curious about many things, including nature and animals. One animal they were especially curious about was the elephant. One day, some villagers took the 5 men to the Raja's palace, where an elephant was kept. The Raja was a kind and wise ruler. He encouraged the men to examine the elephant and learn more about it. So the first blind man touched the elephant's trunk. "An elephant is like a large snake," he proclaimed.
Okay, so we're going to look at a couple of things as we read The Blind Men and the Elephant. One thing is we're going to look at story events, key story events that will help us to summarize what we've. So when we're looking at story events, one thing that's super important is the characters. So if we look back in our text, we can find that our characters are 5 blind men. And if we continue on, we find out that there's also another character, the Raja. And perhaps you could count the elephant as a character as well. Another part of story structure that's important is the setting. It helps us to understand what's happening. In this case, it's long ago. Remember, setting is time and place. So time would be long ago. And then the where would be, or the place would be village in India. And then they did go to Raja's palace is another location where they went as well. So let's go ahead and write those things down. And one of the first key events here is that the Raja encouraged the men to examine the elephant, right? That's kind of what starts off our whole story. I can use inferencing here to figure out what Raja means. So if I look back at paragraph 3, it says, one day some villagers took the 5 men to the Raja's palace, where an elephant was kept. The Raja was a kind and wise ruler. So Raja is not a familiar word to me, but I can put the pieces together. 1, he lives in a palace. 2, it says that he is a kind and wise ruler. And 3, he lives in a village in India. So I can put together that a Raja must be some kind of royalty in India, like a prince, or some kind of leader of their area there. And so in this case, the leader of the village is the Raja. And I can kind of put those pieces together without them telling me outright that he must be important to that village. So here's our next big event. It says that the first blind man touched the elephant's trunk, and he thinks the elephant is like a large snake. Remember that these 5 men are blind, and that means that they can't see, so they're having to rely on their sense of touch to determine what an elephant looks like. Let's continue on.
The second blind man touched the elephant's side. "An elephant is like a hard wall," he announced. The third blind man felt the elephant's tusk. "The elephant is as sharp as a spear," he exclaimed. The fourth blind man touched the elephant's huge ear. "The elephant is like a gigantic fan," he announced. The fifth blind man felt the elephant's tail. "The elephant is like a rope," he declared. Then the men began arguing because each thought he was right. So the Raja interrupted them. Each of you has touched only one part of the elephant, he explained. To know the elephant, you must put all the parts together.
Okay, so we have our characters and our settings. We've got one of the key events. The other thing that we didn't look at on this page is the problem. And really, the problem is that they are curious about the elephant. They want to know more about it, right? Which is why the Raja encourages them to do that. So since that's our problem, trying to figure out what an elephant is like, looks like, we also need to be looking on this page for our solution to that problem. Let's go ahead and continue on with our important events. So the first man thought that it was like a snake because he felt the trunk. The second man touches the side of the elephant and he says it's like a hard wall. And the third blind man feels the tusk and he says it's sharp as a spear. The fourth blind man touches the elephant's huge ear and says that it's like a gigantic fan. Not like a fan that moves on its own, but like a fan that you would fan yourself with, just like a piece of paper or something. So he thinks it's kind of like that because it's large and flat. And the fifth blind man feels the tail and he says, oh, well, an elephant is like a rope. So then, here's another problem. They begin arguing because each thought he was right. And if we go back to our goal of looking at point of view, this is a really interesting concept because each one of these blind men fully believes that they are correct based on what they felt on the elephant. So each of their point of views is very limited though, and they start arguing because they don't want to listen to what other people were experiencing. And I think this happens a lot to us too. We think that we know the full story and so we're arguing our side, but we haven't necessarily thought about all the different components of that problem. So there's a good lesson to learn there that you've got to put everything together to make a good decision or to figure something out. So the solution here is that the Raja explains that they must put all the parts together. There's the solution to their problems. Okay, well, it is a little bit like a gigantic fan when he flaps his ears. He does have a sharp spear with his tusk. If you were to hit the side of the elephant, it would feel like a hard wall. And the trunk feels like a large snake because it's long and kind of round. So those are all valid points of view, but when we put all of those together, we get to actually see what's happening there. So one other thing I wanted to chat about before I have you go and do a story events map is I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the quotation marks. So you'll see that when each, I'm going to change my color, when each blind man started talking, there were quotation marks around what he said. So anytime you see those quotation marks, that means someone is talking, and that gives us a good glimpse into their point of view on something because we get to hear what thoughts they're having in their head. Okay, so those quotation marks mean someone is speaking and saying that aloud unless they're thinking it in their head, which they may share too. But these are all things that help us to understand the point of view. So now I need for you to go in to schoolwork and you're going to fill out a story map for the blind man and the elephant, looking at things like character and setting and problem and events. So go ahead and go in and do that now.